A couple weeks ago, I was at a friend's house for a barbecue, and it was kind of a who's who of the young Catholic church. There were some youth ministers there. There was even a director of a cemetery there, since how the barbecue was at a cemetery. Long story, we'll talk about that some other homily maybe. But anyways, there was also a couple young doctors there, and one of the doctors had just finished medical school, and we got to talking because we were standing around the grill watching the brats and hamburgers cook, and he goes, "You know, Father," and whenever someone says, "You know, Father," you kind of want to watch out what they're going to say next. But he said, "You know, Father, being a doctor, the one thing I want you to preach more about is end-of-life issues." And I go, "Really, why?" And he's like, "Well, many people are confused about it. Many people don't know what the difference between euthanasia is, and maybe this letting the natural order of life live out." And I couldn't agree with him anymore. Because as a priest, many times I'll be called to people's houses in times of difficulties. And so I said, that's a great recommendation, and when the readings are appropriate, I'll make sure to preach about it. Now, today's readings are definitely appropriate, because we hear in the first reading about a young man who has died. And Elijah brings him back to life, because his mother was suffering. Remember, this was a young man, her young son. And of course, in the gospel today, we hear of Jesus stopping the burial procession on their funeral. They go bury this young man. And he tells the young man to rise. And he gets up. And he lives. Do you know the interesting thing about this is that these two people are not still here on earth. They died again. And they're not here on earth. Now, hopefully they have life again, but in a different sense. Eternal life. You see, each and every one of us here, more than likely, will pass away. Now, of course, we should hope and pray that in our lifetime, Jesus comes again. This should be our hope. We never know when Jesus is going to come again. He could come 3 seconds from now. But he didn't. But he can come at any time, and we should always be prepared. Of course, we have Advent for this. But not only during Advent, we should always be prepared that Jesus can come down again, the second coming, anytime that he wants to. And he will, so we should always be prepared. But this does not mean that we should not think about the end of our life here on earth and how we want to live it. Now, of course, the church is against euthanasia. And why? Because what euthanasia does is it speeds up the process of death. It assists in the process of death, saying, well, you have nothing left to live for, so we are going to take care of it and not let God's will be completed. But the Catechism of the Catholic Church does speak about end of life. And there's 2 paragraphs I'd like to bring up to you today. It's 2278 and 2279, and they say it much better than I can. So I'm going to just read 2278 for you. Discontinuing medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disappropriate to the expected outcome can be legitimate. It is a refusal of overzealous treatment. Here, one does not will to cause death. One's inability to impede it is merely accepted. The decision should be made by the patient if they are competent and able, or if not, by those legally entitled to act for the patient, whose responsible will and legitimate interests must always be respected. Once again, from that paragraph 2278, the most important thing out of that says what? Here, one does not will to cause death. We do not will for death to happen, but one's inability to impede it is merely accepted. Even if death is thought intimate, the ordinary care owed to a sick person cannot be legitimately interrupted. Ordinary care, water, food, and basic necessities. The use of painkillers to alleviate the sufferings of the dying, even at the risk of shortening their days, can be morally in conformity with human dignity if death is not willed as either an end or a means, but only foreseen and tolerated as inevitable. Palliative care is a special form of disinterested charity. As such, it should be encouraged. Once again, end of life, and sometimes we have to make this decision, when do we stop with medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disappropriate to the expected outcome? We never will for death to happen, but at the same time, sometimes we have to make the decision not to impede it. St. Ambrose, our patron saint, says this about death. He suffered greatly when his brother was taken from him, when his brother died. And St. Ambrose suffered so much that he wrote a whole book about life and death. And one of the great things he said in there was this: death is the prescription to the illness of life. Now, he is not advocating anyone to take their own life. But if someone is suffering, and there's no hope for recovery, what does death do? It's a prescription to the illness of this life so that they can go to the next. Because you and I as Christians believe in what? We believe in the resurrection. That just like these young men, we too will be brought back to life. Maybe not here on this earth, but with God eternally in heaven. But it's tough, especially as family members, because when people go before us, it is not them who suffer anymore, it is we who suffer, because we miss them, because we long for them. And that decision that sometimes we have to make, saying, when is it the appropriate time to stop chemotherapy? When is it the appropriate time to put someone on DNR or DNI? It can be very tough for families. And there can be guilt associated thinking that you are the one who is letting your parent or your spouse go. But in all reality, what we need to do in certain times is let God's will be done. Because He has a plan for each and every one of us. I'd like to share a very personal story with you, and I don't think I've shared it yet here at St. Ambrose. If I have, I'm sorry. But I think it comes to a great point. As many of you know, my dad passed away at a very young age. He was 53 years old. When he was 47 in 1996, he got diagnosed with parotid cancer. Cancer up here in his face. And I remember the family meeting we had. I came back from school that day in 7th grade. And I came up to my dad's room. And I knew he had a doctor's appointment. And I knew something bad was going to happen, maybe. I remember me and my two siblings went up there because the other ones already knew. And I came up there and he says, my dad said, I have cancer. He said, don't worry though, I'm going to beat it. And I believed him because it was my dad. And I always believed my dad. And he was one of the strongest guys I knew. So I didn't worry much about it. At the end of my 8th grade summer, once again, he got diagnosed with cancer again. Radiation didn't do what it was supposed to do. And he had a big, big surgery. So much so that his face was a little disfigured from then on. He says, don't worry, it took care of the cancer. I'm going to beat it. Well, sure enough, the cancer came back over and over and over again. But every single time, he said, I'm going to beat it. I'm going to beat it. And I believed him because it was my dad. And so he went down to Mayo. I remember many, many times in high school and college, I took that trip down Highway 52 with my dad. Remember I was 15 one time, he let me drive and he fell asleep. It was awesome. He said, don't speed. I said, okay, I'll try not to. But it was a great memory that I was able to help my dad out back from chemotherapy because I knew he was very sick. And at the end of my junior year, maybe it was my senior year, I went on a retreat, Steubenville retreat. At the end of the Steubenville retreat, I was with Father Bechet at the time, then Bishop, now Bishop Bechet. And something that's came to me, and to my siblings as well. And it was this thought from the Our Father. And in the Our Father, there's 3 words, or maybe 4. Thy will be done. God's will be done. And I came home from that retreat. My dad once again had a medical appointment, I'm sure. And the cancer came back much, much worse. And this time, instead of saying, I'm going to beat it, my dad said that God's will be done. And he continued to have medical procedures. He continued to receive chemotherapy. He continued to fight. But it was no longer, I'm going to beat it. It was more of God's will be done. Remember the summer of 2003, I came home one day and once again went to one of those great family meetings, which always meant I was going to cry. I And I came home and we sat down at the kitchen table, and my mom had a healthcare directive in front of her. And they had been going and meeting with the parish priest at the time at St. Joe's. The parish priest told my dad, he said, "Bernie, what do you want? What do you want?" My dad said he wants to live, of course, but he wants God's will to be done. And he doesn't want to suffer anymore. So they came home and they filled out that health care directive, and they put on, "Do not resuscitate, do not incubate." And that at this time, the chemotherapy was causing more harm than it was doing any good. And so that stopped. Of course, my dad still wanted to continue to fight, but he knew it just wasn't going to happen. And he came to the realization that it was time. It was time to stop impeding what was going to happen. He came to grips that he was going to pass away. But he wanted to do it with respect and dignity. And so as a family, we struggled with this. What do we do? How do we let him go? We let him know we loved him and said, "Dad, whatever you want." And his one will was he wanted his family around him when it was time to pass away. And all of us are off at different colleges around the Midwest. But when it came time for him to pass away, it was right after Christmas. It was New Year's Eve, and he was at Our Lady of Grace Our Lady of Grace Hospice, now Our Lady of Grace, it was Our Lady of Good Counsel. And it was New Year's Eve 2003, and I got a call at home. My mom did, saying, "You might want to come in. Bernie's not doing so well." So everyone was able to be there with my dad. His mom, his wife, his 6 children, his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law, and 2 of his grandchildren he knew were there inside of their mothers. And he died peacefully, surrounded by family, the ones that he loved. But it was extremely hard on us as a family, because we thought at first that we gave up on him, that we stopped fighting. But looking back, we realized we didn't stop fighting. Instead, we put our trust in God, that God's will should be done. And at his funeral on January 6, 2004, which was celebration of the Epiphany, which is huge in our family, we always had big parties on Epiphany, we came to the realization that he wasn't suffering anymore. He fought as hard as he could, but eventually he put his trust in God. And this is what we need to do as well, that at the end of life, for us, or for our loved ones, for your parents, for your spouses, God forbid, for your sons or daughters, that we as Catholics, we as Christians have a hope that just like the young men from the first reading and the gospel today, that we too will be brought to life. Maybe not life here on earth, but a life where there will be no more suffering, a life where we'll be one with God, a life eternal, one with God. And this is what we put our hope and our trust in. As St. Ambrose says, my brothers and sisters, death is not necessarily a bad thing. Death can be seen as a prescription to the illness of this life. And what we believe, as we say in the Nicene Creed, we believe what? That we look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. When we are faced with these difficult decisions, don't lose hope. Don't lose trust. Put your trust in God and let God's will be done.